Question or two before we start? Just one, two, no questions? Okay, that's enough of that.
On the first day, you said that the Feldenkrais method was on the cusp of becoming really big, or like getting into.
I think it's on the
You said. I was wondering if you could say something about that.
Well, I think that yesterday I spoke a little bit about what I think are the advantages of this work, the very concrete process by which people can experience themselves making choices and understanding that moment between stimulus and response, the beginning of movement, sensing it, being able to halt it, waiting for a moment, organizing a different possibility so that people can actually know how to make change for themselves. So it's concrete, yeah. And so I think that this work can begin to come into the world as a process for people's self-transformation. Yeah. And so I think we're on the cusp of that. It takes a long, long time for enough practitioners to mature to be able to teach at that level, and to ask that level of question as to how can I present this work in that way. Yeah. So I don't know. We'll see. Either the work will just slowly drain away, or it'll be something that's in the background that's nice. It'll be a nice thing, and people will do nice things, or it'll begin to evolve, and it'll be in the science of the work will be recognized. The research will be done. It'll become more and more a part of the existing process. You know, relative to the mindfulness movement, relative to, I mean, certainly in the physical world. We're not an exercise process, but we're certainly a process that profoundly affects the ability for people to exercise with clarity and a sense of self-knowing. So it's like this work is a building block for anything else that you want to do. So, yeah, all of you know enough people who've, found that their swimming has improved, or their horse riding, or their ability to be with their partner has improved for some way, and you can't even put words to it, but they just see that the quality of their life has improved. Yeah. So, yeah.
I was pondering after yesterday that the connection, there's this lovely moment that you can really experience, and how does that link to imagination? It feels like for me there's some.
So yeah, that's a great question, because when we look at the Mitsoff, she said that lovely moment that with Kat, and I don't know, was it you? No, it was, who, Alexandra, who was the woman? Huh? Anastasia, yeah. So that moment, when we really look at the properties of the prefrontal cortex, its major property is that it has the ability to make distinctions. And it's very interesting. There's a relationship between the prefrontal cortex and the limbic system. If you're emotionally overcharged, overwrought, it's very difficult to make distinctions. If the emotional system is really engaged, then your ability to think clearly is not so easy. Yeah? So the two systems inhibit each other. Yeah? And it depends on where your attention goes. Now, when your attention clearly goes to making distinctions, the ability of the prefrontal cortex, when it's making distinctions, is that its major capacity is to move towards imagination, towards novelty, towards curiosity, towards these higher human functions from which evolution can take place, and those can't take place without discrimination. Yeah? So this whole process, that process of being here, and then subtly, I don't even know how to say it, but it's almost like another image of potential begins to emerge, and we don't know what the outcome is going to be, but there is some image that begins to emerge, and oftentimes we'll see something spontaneous, and sometimes things that are really difficult a few days later, and people, like the quality of the room yesterday relative to Tuesday was an order of magnitude of different in the way that you guys were with each other, and the quality with which you were attending to each other and listening from yourself as you had gone through a couple of days of beginning to find out how to find the support with yourself in a different way. Yeah. So clearly, out of that ability to sense, another world of experience can begin to emerge. Yeah. I mean, it goes back to this very simple thing that Moshe, in the very first sentence of the Awareness to Movement book, we act in accordance with our self-image, and that self-image in turn governs the outcome of our every activity. Yeah. And so long as we're governed by our self-image, which is governed by the way we've historically maintained ourselves, the way we were conditioned by gravity, that's the term I've been using. But when we have the means, so to speak, to cancel gravity, when we're not in the habitual muscular habit where we hide our unconsciousness or our confusion, and we're really in a kind of an open quality where the support is simple, our mind is quiet, we're alert, we're able to make discriminations, I believe that's closer to the human potential. And we have this great capacity. It's not like I'm sitting and wondering about my mind, because I'm going to get up and I'm going to actually act differently because I can make the distinction. And because I act differently, I'm going to get a whole different world of feedback, a whole different interaction with what's going to take place, which will feed my ability to continue to refine myself. Anybody see the movie Arrival? The metaphor for Feldenkrais. Yeah, it's worth seeing. An alien race comes onto the planet, and everybody's getting up in arms, and the alien race realizes that they're going to need humans for their survival in 1,000 years, and so they have to plant a seed in the human race so the human race can prepare itself, so it can evolve to the point that they're going to be able to help the alien race in 1,000 years. And the main element so they have to learn to communicate. Humans, and the story's about this woman who's a linguist trying to figure out how the alien race communicates. The alien race does not communicate in serial images. They don't think in time and space. So it's not like one after the other, the way we speak in a serial way. Their language is an image, and the image comes out of, if you look at the classic image of the Om, or from a Zen perspective, the classic image of the void, their image is circular. And it's the subtle distinctions in the way the image is presented. Out of the void comes the 10,000 things. So they changes the image, and because you work in the images, you're not bound by time and space. So the woman begins to see the past and the future. And so it's a process of seeding. Well, I believe that these lessons seed a pre-verbal image that leads to a particular potential for evolution for each of us. Yeah. And I think it's the practice that leads to that ability to really take advantage of this tremendous capacity in our prefrontal cortex to imagine a different set of possibilities, a different set of futures. And it's very difficult to imagine if you're bound by the way you know yourself. Yeah. So hopefully, yeah.
I'll get the movie.
Okay.
Oh, I'll just would add to that, that I think, you know, and Feldenkrais talks about it a lot. It's actually about learning a new way of learning, or actually maybe returning to the way you learnt as a very small child. That is to say, with openness and who knew where it would go. And, you know, sometimes you'll be doing an ATM, or you'll remember and do a part of an ATM later.
Right.
And it will almost take you back to that kind of like that free time when you didn't know what was going to happen next.
That was
and you were learning.
Yeah. That was my conversation with the practitioners last night. Because I've said that it would be lovely if I could have the opportunity to meet Moshe today, because I would have so much fun arguing with him about some things. And the first thing that I would argue with him about is his notion of learning to learn. Because I think that it's more appropriate for us to think that we remember how to learn. Learning is inherent within us. So then it's a question of how do we utilize the context to take advantage of what's inherent within us. Yeah. I mean, tranquility is inherent within us. Yeah. How do we uncover it? Yeah. It's not how do I acquire it. How do I uncover these?
Find it, yeah.
So how do I uncover it? And the only way I can uncover it is to not be in the place that keeps me from being, which is, again, my muscular habit. That's basically the argument, and that's the entire argument in the book of Body Mature Behavior. Yeah. So. Yeah, if you just think of it as first of all, you have to understand Moshe as an academic was writing to his high-level academic friends, and so he wasn't going to write a paper that didn't meet the criterion of a well-organized paper. And so he had to give his rationale, he had to give his hypothesis, his theory, and then he had to prove his theory, you know, relative to what was the standard of the time. So if you just see it as a letter, he's just writing to Freud. Well, let's take a look at what is conditioning, what is anxiety, how do we come to states of anxiety and insecurity, how does in a sense, how does psychotherapy or psychoanalysis deal with that? If you really ask the question, because the point of psychoanalysis is to cure someone. Well, what does it mean to cure them? It means to bring them to a state. Imagine the demeanor you would have if you were no longer anxious and no longer insecure. What would be your breath? What would be your face? And Freud says, well, 14 years of time with yourself in this process, then you could eventually, and Feldenkrais says, I think we could do this a lot faster. Yeah. Yeah.
If the prefrontal cortex's ability to discern difference is central to the method,
yes,
and is it consciously discern difference, how does the method apply to people that may not have the capacity or the focus to do that, like children or people with a intellectual disability?
Oh, geez, we could go for days on this question. Yeah, and I don't think it's really what we need to do right now in the training program. Yeah, and I'm happy to meet and discuss that with children. When you touch them, you're already in the environment. They haven't engaged the particular way of. They haven't been conditioned by the world in such a way that they're inflexible. So you give a little image and they just go, okay, wow, let me try that. Because up until the time that they're 12 years old, neurologically, they will try everything. Now, about the age of 12, the brain actually begins to cull all the pathways that are not myelinated. So it moves towards efficiency. And the human being has to become efficient. Yeah, so all the things that they try, and they no longer, they do this, and they do that, and they're over here, and they're over there, and they're investigating this. But at some point in time, throughout the way that they're conditioned, through the environment, the family, whatever, they begin to narrow down a sense of I. They acquire the sense of I. That sense of I is absolutely crucial to a sense of being able to interact with the world, with any kind of autonomy and authority, and to give them the ability to survive relative to the conditions around them. Unfortunately, the identification with I with this identification with I as one goes on, and the identification with what one produces to give one a sense of I or the sense of meaning takes them away from really being comfortable with themselves. It's two different forces almost. Yeah. But when we touch with children and they're in that really, really open place, in that state, they're just potential. Yeah. Now, when you're working with someone who's injured, then you're dealing with who can't, so to speak, intellectually deal with the work. There are other profound capacities we have as human beings to care for people. And we may not be able to have them take that leap into consciousness, but the ability for them to appreciate being cared for, to be touched, to find support, to find some kind of a sense of freedom where they're not bound in some kind of way is, I believe, profoundly appreciated. Yeah. I mean, I've worked with kids that are completely decerebrated. Yeah, a woman who was pregnant and was in a car wreck. Her baby's head hit the steering wheel and had no cerebral cortex. Completely decerebrated. Yeah. He was just the neurological reactions, and he would still have the ability to grow. I worked with that child for a couple of years. He would come every week, and he knew pleasure, and he knew pain. And it was a great pleasure to be with him in such a way that he experienced pleasure. Yeah. And he appreciated pleasure because pleasure gave him, he never, ever volitionally was able to engage in the world. But you could just watch his face begin to beam as something, some other surface, some other way, something was responsive too, but there wasn't. I don't think that there was. I mean, we don't know. And we don't know how to the degree to which that was appreciated by a sense of being. But I know that there were moments when I wept with the beauty of the lessons. Yeah. So there's this humanity in this work. Yeah. Just this process to be with myself in such a way that I'm sitting quietly with myself, and when I touch someone, that I've taken the time to be in such a way that I know that I'm in the most sensitive place possible to give them the greatest capacity to discriminate possible. I can't imagine an act of caring that's greater than that. Yeah. I mean, it's a rare commodity. Yeah. Almost invariably, we're touched to gain something or to ask for something or wanting something or expressing something, and not just to touch someone to have them experience the pleasure of being themselves. Now, well, I'm teaching you in a funny kind of way because we're learning how to help people find within themselves the conscious ability to ask themselves questions. We have to have some way that we can have them ask questions so that they refer back to themselves in the process. And it may as well be functional. Yeah? Okay, end of lesson. Take care of it. It's a little wobbly. It may be me. I slept really horribly last night, so maybe I'm wobbly. Speak a little louder. All right. Well, thank you very much for the. So be gentle with yourself today. Care for yourself.